If you're familiar with the work After Virtue as a whole, he sees more as leading inexorably into a kind of emotivism, which with its attendant subjectivism, precisely because of those two first points that are admired, the indefinability of the good. So there's really no arguing about the good that can be done if it's indefinable in the way that Moore describes it as indefinable. And then the is-ought distinction, maintaining this naturalistic fallacy to be a fallacy, cuts short any kind of moral philosophy that seeks to confront reality in a sophisticated way. And that comes out in that chapter 5 that is included in your packet, where MacIntyre is contrasting man as he finds himself with man as he ought to be, and he gives his argument for certain functional concepts, and then argues that in the Aristotelian tradition, and rightly so, man is a functional concept. Let me just say two points by way of not so much defense as clarification of MacIntyre's point, and why I think von Hildebrand should not perhaps have admired Moore for those points. The first is that I agree that one could think of value as a kind of arche, and in archon is not in and of itself indefinable, right? So a first thing might be only known indemonstrably, right? But that doesn't mean you can't define it. So nature is an example of this, right? Nature is not the sort of thing that anyone can demonstrate. It doesn't follow from some prior principles. That's what it means to say that it's first. But having been apprehended, that doesn't mean that it's indefinable. Okay? So to say that a first cause or a first principle or some other primary type of being like value is indemonstrable is not the same thing as saying that it's indefinable. Okay? And it's by way of that kind of distinction that I think MacIntyre, working from within the Augustinian Thomistic tradition, is able to describe the good in functional terms. The second point is that the very notion of importance that von Hildebrand draws out has with it an affirmation of an ought, right? To say that a thing is important is to say that it ought to be. It's to affirm the kind of coupling of the being of the thing with its being held out in existence, and you're recognizing that this ought to be, whether we're talking about a value or some other category of importance. So I think in this foundational concept of von Hildebrand, there is an explicit effort to overcome the is-ought division and to find oughtness raised to the level of perception of the givenness of certain kinds of beings. So in grasping the being to be of value, we recognize it ought to be what it is, the way that it is. And from that, we can make other kinds of statements with respect to value response and so forth, but long before we even get there, we have to, I think, appreciate the profoundly un-Moorean, un-Humean point at the foundation of von Hildebrand's value philosophy in the way in which he talks about importance and how things rise to the level of importance. And it's on that score that I think we can find a certain resonance between von Hildebrand treatment of importance as such and the categories of importance with the McIntyrean way of recognizing the functional nature of man himself and other key terms.
I think von Hildebrand wants to say that with human persons, that which makes for a good person is a fundamentally more transcendent principle than you have with Clock and Farmer. He often uses that idea of the immanent structure of a thing. You have just to inspect the immanent structure of the clock, and you can read off what is the good functioning of it. But he wants to say, for instance, that with let's say, a moral virtue like gratitude, you can't just look at this immanent functioning of man and determine that being grateful to benefactors is, in fact, makes for a good man. Mm-hmm. He wants rather to say you have to consult what it is to receive an unmerited benefit from a benefactor, what it is to be in the debt of such a benefactor, and what it is to owe thanks. Then you are in a position to see that, yes, a good man is also a grateful man. But he makes a great point, like in chapter 16, of saying that that goodness can't be read off some inner functioning of man analogous to the way in which the good clock can be read off of the clock and its work of timekeeping. And so that's why I say there's a transcendent reference. And here, maybe I'm being more relational, as you were saying earlier this morning. I should be, that this goodness that lies in being grateful appears when one considers relations to benefactors, but also, Van Hildebrand wants to say there are considerations of good and value that you discern in the benefactor. And that puts you in a position to see the moral excellence of being grateful, and in a position to see that the grateful person is also a good person. So I think this functional idea, there's one place where he says a source of a lot of problems, he thinks, in Greek ethics are analogies between medicine and ethics that are too closely drawn. Because in medicine, this functioning of an organ or a system can be determined, and then what the good functioning is can be made out. And to transfer that to man and to the moral life, I think von Hildebrand gives an overly immanentistic approach to virtue and neglects this transcendent reference without which being a good man isn't really intelligible. So along those lines.
Mm-hmm. And yet, we discussed at length the question of the bad angel on page 155 of the Ethics, right? The fallen angel. It's the angel that became what it ought not to become. Right? One can only make sense of the fallen angel as fallen and begin to wrestle with the way in which a qualitative value could turn the table on the ontological value, to use von Hildebrand's language, if you're working with this kind of concept of the relationship between the being as it is and the being as it ought to be. And similarly with respect to man. So I think that using the analogy doesn't mechanize or instrumentalize man. I mean, this is an analogy, but the very moral categories that allow us to distinguish between value and disvalue, between good and evil, qualitative values, relies upon this kind of functional concept, even in von Hildebrand's thought, I want to suggest. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about nature earlier was to help prepare for what McIntyre is arguing for here, and I guess Kelly already just made this point, but talking about man as a functional concept can be a little misleading if we give too much weight to the analogy. But the notion of nature as an intrinsic principle of notion and stability, or the notion of the essence of something as being a tati ein einai, the what it was for the thing to be, there already is embedded in the very notion of nature the oughtness, the what it is for this thing to be-ness of the thing. That's a very different view of nature. It's a view of nature that has depth to it, that recognizes nature to be not so much a composition of facts divorced from values, but for value to be embedded in the very being of things. And the most obvious value being the objective value of this, of the type of being. Right? Where is that value to be found? It's to be found in the being insofar as it is, also in connection insofar as it's becoming more fully what it is. And it's from that vantage point that I think we can talk about the bad angel or the bad man or a lack of gratitude and so on and so forth. So I see far more resonance here, and I'm a bit puzzled about where the tension is as well. We are beings who long for union with the source of all being. So we don't need to understand that simply as an urging, but it is a longing. I mean, we're fundamentally erotic beings. And I don't think von Hildebrand would disagree with that. And here's an Augustinian point, and it's also a Platonic point. I mean, we are beings who are aware of our orientation towards something. We're both rich and poor, like in that account of Eros that Socrates provides in the Symposium, or a combination of poverty and riches. And our attunement to the world of value is born from this loving orientation, and that I see to be very much in unison with the Thomistic tradition. Although some features of love indeed are worked out on the basis of fundamental inclinations in the human being, but those I think don't need to be looked at as purely immanently revealed or functionalistic or something like that. So I think you can have your erotic orientation and your transcendence too in both traditions.